The content discussed in this podcast is intended for educational and informational purposes only. The views are our own and do not represent any law enforcement agency, employer, or organization. Throughout this episode, we may reference case law, which refers to legal rules and principles established by prior court decisions. These summaries are not legal advice and are presented in simplified terms for general understanding and discussion. While we aim to be accurate, laws can vary by jurisdiction and change over time. Nothing in this episode should be interpreted as legal guidance. You should always consult a qualified attorney for advice related to your specific situation. Today's episode is going to be more inspired to our law enforcement community that follows us along. However, if you're not in law enforcement, this will still benefit you. You can learn a lot from this. Some of this stuff you might already know. Chances are you probably don't know a lot of the things that we're going to cover. And this episode's going to let you know why we do what we do.
Yeah, overall it's just very informative.
So with that, we're going to start off with a scenario. Mystal?
All right, so scenario. Law enforcement officer observes an expired license plate. He conducts a traffic stop on the vehicle and orders the driver out. When he orders the driver out, he notices a bulge, conducts a pat-down, and discovers a weapon. The driver is arrested, and this case actually makes it to the Supreme Court.
It does. So the two questions we have for you guys are, when a law enforcement officer legally stops a vehicle, can that officer order the driver out of the vehicle? Yes or no? Does this violate the Fourth Amendment? Yes or no? Tony?
Answer.
The answer is yes, you absolutely can order the driver out. And no, it doesn't violate the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution. So, Supreme Court addressed this with Pennsylvania versus Mimms. Actually, the scenario that Mystal gave us. State of Pennsylvania versus Mr. Mimms there. Cop orders him out. And it goes up to their attorneys are saying, hey, he can't get the guy out of the car.
Yeah, violated his rights.
Yeah, so this goes all the way up to the chain to the U.S. Supreme Court, and the court determined that the minor intrusion of that guy's freedom is outweighed heavily by the officer's safety, right? So yeah. The Supreme Court held that officer safety outweighs any inconvenience, right? So do we see this in use today?
Absolutely. I get people out of the car all the time on traffic stops. I know Matt does too, and I know you did too, right? Yeah. And so we're not going to get into tactics or anything, but with that being said, every day law enforcement is applying this case law every single day. So what's the benefit of covering it here today for cops, and what's the benefit for the public? One, if you're a civilian, normal everyday person driving and you get stopped, if you're not stopped often, it could be stressful, and then you have a law enforcement officer ask you to exit your vehicle. That could get you kind of nervous. Well, listening today, actually that's pretty normal, and I would say most of the people that I know and work with and have trained ask people out of vehicles. So it is really normal for our area. As a cop, I don't know. I think some agencies are more restrictive about letting you get people out of vehicles or whatever. And I'll also say, know your state case law too, because state case law can be more restrictive than federal or the U.S. Supreme Court case law. So know your case law and always read it for yourself. I would tell my guys, we'd be breaking in, and I would say, hey, what does the Supreme Court say about this? I'll have them answer it and then say, or they'll, Tony, he'd be like, I don't know. I have no idea. Right? I have no idea. And so we would talk about it, but I'm like, but here are resources for you to read it for yourself, right? Until Tony would take the next step in actually researching it for himself, someone can tell you something all day, but until you see it written down in black and white, that is how it's stuck for me, was doing the research myself and not just trusting someone because they heard from their break-in in 1970 that that's what you do, right? In law enforcement, we tend to just say, well, I was trained that way, so I'm training you that way. And when you have someone ask a why, you don't always get an answer. So.
And law enforcement is always continuously changing
Yes.
with the times.
Yes.
So why are we still on this mindset of, well, that's how we've always done it?
Yeah. Or that's what my break-in told me 20 years ago or whatever, right? You should constantly be educating yourself. And I hope you're doing it in all parts of your life, but especially in a career field that's ever evolving and changing. So I highly recommend, if you don't already, buy a couple books. This book right here, we'll put it in the show notes. Excellent resource. There's a few others I get my guys. I made some, we call them blue books for my boys. But do your own research. Have it in your car. Like if there's a question, you can look it up. But do your due diligence. We can tell you something all day, but until you look it up for yourself, it doesn't matter. Like,
Right. In these cases, new cases pop up all the time. This one was, the stop was in 70.
yeah.
Case was decided in 77. So it's held since 1977. A lot of things have come about since then, but that one's still that's held pretty fast.
Yeah, and so not to go off on the weeds because this is specifically Pennsylvania versus Mimms case law that we're teaching you guys. But for those of you in law enforcement that don't follow case law regularly or don't have a book, just know there's a new case law that just came out from the Supreme Court. I mean, if you haven't found it,
Yeah.
you should
Yeah.
probably pay attention to it because that could drastically affect how you do things. And just a quick case law so you guys can look that up. It's Barnes versus Felix. So that's the newest one that's been out. So please, if you haven't and you don't constantly stay on top of case law, look that up. So back to Pennsylvania versus Mimms.
Well, I'm even going to hit on the recent decision. Like as soon as it came out, I sent it to the group of my guys to read and review. Maybe we'll hit on that one on our next law enforcement inspired topic. We had a different plan, but now that you brought that up, great point. Maybe we need to hit on that one and how it impacts law enforcement. I get it. It's easy to get in the weeds, especially when you're reading case law on your computer or you're trying to figure out, like, what does this even mean? Because I've been there, and trust me, that's how I started out down on my path. Is I was like, I just got to figure it out. I found it's a lot easier if you can find resources like what we've mentioned, but if it's presented to you in a manner of, okay, this is what happened and this is how it affects me, right? And then it's easier to apply. So maybe we'll get into that one on our next law enforcement episode. But back to Pennsylvania v. Mimms.
Yeah, Pennsylvania v. Mimms. So the what is, can you order a driver to step out of the car? It's not really a question. You're not asking.
Yeah.
And the why behind that, according to the Supreme Court, is it doesn't matter. The Supreme Court says you can ask them out for any reason. So it doesn't have to be for officer safety. It doesn't have to be, for...
You don't have to have reasonable articulable suspicion.
Yeah.
You can literally any reason.
Yeah, any reason. So it's good to know that. So if you are on the stand and someone asks you, well, why did you ask them to exit the vehicle? Well, you don't want to say because that's how I was trained, because maybe you were trained wrong. You don't want to say because officer safety, because then you go down a rabbit hole of, why. The answer to that is because you can, according to the U.S. Supreme Court. So any reason.
Well, and to piggyback on what you said, you also don't want to be that guy or girl on the stand that's like, why did you do what you do? And you say, because my break-in partner from 10 years ago told me that I could, right? We're in a high-stakes career field. You need to know exactly what you can do, when you can do it, and why. And you need to know that for yourself. So if that feels like it's hitting home, I hope it does. I hope it does to some listeners. Mm-hmm. But if it feels like it's hitting home, then you have time to change it. Like, every day is an opportunity to change that. Like, if you're doing something right now in your work program and you don't know why you're doing it, you have time to change it. So fix it, right? Anyway, case law is the start of all of that. If you start with case law, you can never go wrong, right? It's literally the rules to our job.
It is, and that goes over. Tony kind of mentioned courtroom testimony a little bit. So if you're going to drop a case law on a courtroom on stand, you better know what you're talking about. Because if you don't, that defense attorney is going to rip you apart. Yeah. So please do your research on case law.
Well, it depends on the defense attorney.
True.
A good one.
A good one.
A good one.
I'll say a good one is going to question you, and a good one is going to stop questioning you after about 2 or 3 questions. Yeah. If you know what you're talking about. And I'm speaking from experience because I have done that. It shuts down that argument very quickly, and they move on.
Right.
So it doesn't suffice just to know it. Like you don't want to say, I can get them out because of Pennsylvania versus Mimms. You have to actually understand it and expect a conversation, especially in a courtroom, or not really a conversation, but a line of questioning. So if all you learn is you can do that because Pennsylvania versus Mimms, and they start asking you why, and your answer is Pennsylvania versus Mimms, like you don't understand it, you're going to look like an idiot. And understanding the why gets you to the how a lot faster. All right. So what? Can you get them out? Why? Because United States Supreme Court says you can. Hesitation is dangerous. If we can eliminate the hesitation of, can I do this? Or, just know that you can, understand it, and understand how to apply it properly.
Yep. So I'm going to read the significance just so I don't miss anything and I don't mess it up. So I'm going to read the significance of this case. Pennsylvania v. Mimms expanded police authority during traffic stops, allowing officers to order drivers out of vehicles without individualized suspicion. So that means they didn't need reasonable articulable suspicion. They could order them out for any reason. The case set a precedent for balancing minimal intrusions against police officer safety and laid the groundwork for later decisions. So that's a pretty big deal. It was, paved the way for other cases. So
it did, and we're still continuing this case to this day.
Yep.
Yeah.
Unless your state's more restrictive.
Yep.
But to wrap things up, that's a quick synopsis of this case. We could go on for hours and go into depth about what this case actually is, how it affects us, all that kinds of things. But that's just a quick synopsis for you guys who I'm hoping those of you that are in law enforcement already know this case. If you haven't, please research this case because it is only going to help you.
That and know your policy too. Know your policy because I do have some buddies that work for agencies that they aren't necessarily allowed to. I think you worked in a previous agency that they weren't allowed to have people exit or had to be certain conditions. So also know your policy too. So
yes. Yep. So with all that being said, if you don't, please subscribe to us. We need those subscribers so we can help getting this word out to you guys. Like, follow, comment. We have all the platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, our email, offscriptfanmail@gmail.com. Just any type of way. If you have any questions on this episode, send those in too. If you have any questions about anything else, keep sending them in. We'll keep answering those questions to you guys.